The train had been late. That was the first thing Eliza noticed when she stepped onto the platform, how the sun had already started its slow burn toward the horizon, turning the sky the color of a healing bruise. She'd counted on arriving in daylight, counted on having time to compose herself, to smooth her skirts, to practice the smile she'd been rehearsing for 3 weeks. Instead, she stumbled off the last step with her bag catching on the railing and her hat knocked sideways, looking exactly like what she was. Desperate. The platform was crowded, not with the usual trickle of travelers, but with people who'd come specifically to watch. She could feel it in the way they stood, too still, too focused, waiting. That her? Must be. Look at that dress. Thought she'd be prettier. The voices came from somewhere to her left, not quite whispered. Eliza kept her eyes forward and tried to remember how to breathe. Her corset felt too tight. Everything felt too tight. She scanned the crowd for a face she'd only seen in a photograph. Bernard Hutchins, her intended. The man who'd answered her letter. The man who'd sent money for her train ticket and promised her a fresh start in a place where nobody knew her name or what she'd done. The man who was currently staring at her from 15 feet away with an expression that made her stomach drop. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman in a blue dress with perfect posture and a mouth like a knife slash. Behind them, a small cluster of townspeople had arranged themselves like spectators at a hanging. Eliza forced her feet to move. One step. Another. Her bag felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "Mr. Hutchins?" Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. He didn't answer right away. Just looked at her. Really looked. The way you'd examine a horse you suspected was lame. The woman in blue said something to him, too quiet to hear. He nodded. "Miss Hart." He didn't move to take her bag. Didn't offer his hand. "You're late." The train arrived exactly when it was scheduled to arrive. His voice was clipped, Eastern educated. Nothing like the warm tone from his letters. "You're late because you weren't on the earlier connection. The one you were supposed to take." Her mouth went dry. "I missed it. There was a delay in St. Louis, yes. I received a telegram." He pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket, held it up like evidence. "From a Mrs. Davenport claiming to be your traveling companion. Interesting, considering you told me you'd be traveling alone." The platform seemed to tilt. "She was just someone I met on the—" "You told me," he continued, his voice getting louder now, playing to the crowd, "that you were a school teacher from Philadelphia, 26 years old, never married, an orphan with no living family." Each word landed like a hammer. "You told me you were respectable." Someone in the crowd made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite a gasp. Eliza's face burned. "I am. I didn't lie about—" Mrs. Davenport was very chatty in her telegram. Bernard's mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile if smiles could cut. "She wanted to make sure I knew what a delightful companion you'd been. How generous I was to give a woman in your particular situation a second chance. How she hoped the baby wouldn't come too early." The world stopped. "There is no baby," Eliza said. Her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. She was confused. She was confused about you crying in the dining car, about you being sick every morning, about the ring you wore on your right hand that you said came from a dead husband. "I never said—" "What was his name?" Bernard stepped closer, close enough that she could smell hair tonic and something sour underneath. "Your dead husband. What was his name?" Her mind went blank. The lie she'd told Mrs. Davenport, the stupid, desperate story she'd spun to explain why a single woman was traveling west alone, had evaporated like steam. "I thought so." Bernard turned to the woman in blue. "Margaret, would you like to do the honors?" Margaret stepped forward, and Eliza finally understood. This wasn't confusion. This was theater. "Ladies and gentlemen," Margaret's voice carried across the platform like she was addressing a church congregation, "I'd like to introduce you to Miss Eliza Hart, or Mrs. Someone, or whoever she's pretending to be today." She paused for effect. "My fiancé was kind enough to show me the letters she sent him. Very touching, very detailed, particularly the parts about her pure character and Christian upbringing." More murmurs from the crowd. Someone laughed. "Bernard showed remarkable charity in offering marriage to a stranger." Margaret's smile was poison sweet. But even his generosity has limits. We don't tolerate liars in Crestfall. And we certainly don't tolerate women who... That's enough! The voice came from the back of the crowd, low, rough, and completely unexpected. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. The murmuring stopped. Eliza couldn't see who'd spoken, but she watched the crowd part like water around a stone. A man walked through the gap they made. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing clothes that had seen better days, and a hat pulled low enough to shadow most of his face. He moved like someone used to people getting out of his way. He stopped a few feet from Bernard and Margaret, close enough to be part of the scene, but not quite joining it. "Caleb," Bernard's voice had changed, still sharp, but now with an edge of uncertainty. "This doesn't concern you." Didn't say it did. The man, Caleb, tilted his head just enough for Eliza to catch a glimpse of his profile. Hard jaw. A scar cutting through his eyebrow, eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to be surprised by anything. "But you've made your point. Everyone's seen what they came to see. Show's over." "The show," Margaret said coldly, "is over when we say it is." Caleb finally looked at her. Just looked. Nothing more. Margaret's mouth thinned. "She came here under false pretenses," Bernard said, recovering his footing. "She lied about who she is, about her situation. She took my money and..." "How much?" "Excuse me? How much money did you send her?" Caleb's voice stayed level, flat, like he was asking about the weather. Bernard hesitated. "That's not... Train ticket from Philadelphia is about $40. Let's say 50 to be generous. That what you sent?" "The amount isn't the point. So that's a yes." Caleb shifted his weight, and Eliza noticed something she hadn't before. Everyone was watching him like they were afraid to look away. $50. You paid $50 for a bride, sight unseen, based on some letters. And now you're mad because she's not what you ordered. She lied. And you bought a woman like you'd buy livestock. Caleb let that sit for a moment. "Sounds like you're both pretty desperate. Difference is, she didn't call the whole town out to watch you get humiliated." Margaret made a sound like a stepped-on cat. "How dare you? She's got nowhere to go." Caleb cut her off without raising his voice. "You've made sure everyone knows she's a liar. She can't get back on that train without money she doesn't have. Can't stay in town because you've already poisoned that well. So what exactly did you think was going to happen here? She was going to apologize and disappear?" Bernard's face was turning red. She deserves to be left alone." Caleb turned, finally looking directly at Eliza for the first time. His eyes were gray, the color of winter sky. Empty of judgment, empty of pity, just looking. "You got anywhere to be?" Eliza's throat had closed up. She shook her head. "You got anyone coming for you?" Another shake. "You got money for a hotel?" She couldn't speak, but her face must have answered for her. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She comes with me." The crowd erupted. "Absolutely not." "You can't be serious." "Caleb, think about what you're..." He ignored all of it, reached down and picked up Eliza's bag like it weighed nothing. "My wagon's around the side. You coming or not?" Eliza stared at him. This stranger who'd just inserted himself into her disaster for no reason she could understand. Who was offering her an escape she couldn't afford to question? "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Something flickered across his face, too fast to read. "Because they want you to beg. And I don't particularly feel like watching that." He started walking, didn't look back to see if she'd follow. Eliza glanced at Bernard, at Margaret, at the crowd of faces watching her with expressions ranging from disgust to fascination. She thought about the money she didn't have, the options that didn't exist, the future she'd already gambled and lost. Then she followed the stranger. Behind her the noise swelled, voices arguing, shouting questions that went unanswered. She kept her eyes forward, following the broad back of a man whose name she barely knew, into a situation she couldn't begin to predict. The wagon was exactly where he'd said it would be, old, weather-beaten, pulled by two horses that looked as tired as she felt. Caleb tossed her bag into the back and climbed up onto the driver's seat without ceremony. He didn't help her up, didn't say anything, just waited while she struggled with her skirts and her dignity, and finally managed to haul herself onto the bench beside him. The second she was seated, he clicked his tongue and the horses started moving. They rode in silence through the main street of Crestfall, a collection of wooden buildings that probably looked charming in better light, but now just looked tired. Eliza could feel eyes on them from every window, every doorway, could imagine the conversations already starting. "They're going to talk," she said finally. They were already talking. "About you now, because of me," Caleb shrugged. "They've been talking about me for 5 years. I'm used to it." She wanted to ask what they said, wanted to ask why he lived alone, why people watched him like he was dangerous, why he'd stepped into her disaster when he clearly preferred to be left alone. But the set of his shoulders suggested he was done with conversation, and Eliza was too tired to push. The town fell away behind them. The road, if you could call it that, cut through open prairie, nothing but grass and sky in every direction. The sun was almost gone now, leaving streaks of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if Eliza had the energy to care. "How far?" she asked after what felt like an hour. "Another 20 minutes. Do you have—" She didn't know how to finish the question. A wife? A family? Any reason at all to believe this wasn't a monumentally stupid decision? "It's just me," Caleb said, like he'd heard the question she hadn't asked. "Cabin's small. You'll have the bedroom. I'll sleep in the barn until we figure out what's next." "The barn?" "Got a cot out there. It's fine." It wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. But Eliza was starting to realize that fine had stopped being an option the moment she'd stepped off that train. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "No. So why did you?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "You ever see a wolf pack corner something? The way they take turns, wear it down, wait for it to stop fighting back?" Eliza's skin prickled. "That's what they were doing to you. And I've had enough of watching things get torn apart for entertainment." There was something in his voice, something old and buried deep. Eliza didn't push. The cabin appeared as the last light faded, a dark shape against darker prairie, small and solitary. No other buildings in sight, no lights, no signs of life except for smoke that might have been coming from a chimney. Caleb pulled the horses to a stop and climbed down. This time, he did offer his hand. Eliza took it. His palm was calloused, his grip firm but careful. He released her the moment her feet touched ground. "Door's open," he said, already moving to unhitch the horses. "There's a lamp on the table just inside, matches next to it. I'll bring your bag in after I get these two settled." The cabin door hung slightly crooked. Eliza pushed it open and stepped into darkness that smelled like wood smoke and dust and loneliness. She found the lamp by feel, struck a match with trembling hands, and watched the light spread across a single room that was somehow exactly what she'd expected, and nothing like it at the same time. A table, 2 chairs, a stove in the corner with a stack of wood beside it, shelves holding a sparse collection of dishes and supplies, a doorway leading to what must be the bedroom. Everything clean but bare, functional. Like whoever lived here had forgotten that homes were supposed to be more than just shelters. The door opened behind her. Caleb set her bag down just inside the threshold. "Bedroom's through there," he said, nodding toward the doorway. "Sheets are clean. Changed them last week. There's a basin for washing. Water barrel's outside. I'll fill it in the morning. Outhouse is 20 paces that direction." He pointed. "You need anything else tonight?" Eliza's mind was blank. She couldn't think of a single thing except how much her feet hurt and how badly she wanted to cry and how this stranger had just given her more than she deserved without asking for anything in return. "No," she whispered. "Thank you." Caleb nodded once, started to turn away. "Wait." The word came out louder than she'd intended. He stopped. "What do tomorrow. What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I've got work to do. You can rest or help if you want. Day after that, we'll see." He paused. "You're safe here. That's all that matters tonight." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like finality. Eliza stood in the lamplight, surrounded by silence so complete it rang in her ears. She thought about the train platform, about Bernard's face, about Margaret's poisoned smile and the crowd's hungry eyes. She thought about the man who'd called them wolves, and then offered her sanctuary without knowing anything about her, except that she'd lied. Then she went into the bedroom, sat down on the edge of a bed that smelled like soap and cedar, and cried for the first time since Philadelphia's Chema. The barn was cold. Caleb had forgotten how cold it could get at night, or maybe he'd just gotten better at not noticing. He stretched out on the cot, still wearing his boots, and stared up at the roof beams barely visible in the dark. He could hear the horses shifting in their stalls, could hear the wind starting to pick up outside, could not stop hearing the sound of that woman's voice when she'd asked him why. He didn't have a good answer, not one that made sense anyway. The smart thing would have been to keep walking, to let Crestfall's self-righteous citizens have their show and get back to the business of staying invisible. He'd spent 5 years building a wall between himself and that town, and he'd just put a crack in it for a woman whose name he barely remembered. Eliza. Eliza Hart. Probably not even her real name. But when he'd seen her standing there, back straight, chin up, trying so hard to look like she wasn't breaking, something in his chest had tightened, something old and sharp and familiar. He knew what it looked like when someone had nothing left to lose. He'd been that person once. The wind rattled the barn door. Caleb closed his eyes and tried not to think about the last time he'd let someone into his life. Tried not to remember how that had ended. Tried and failed. Morning came too early. Eliza woke to sunlight streaming through a window she didn't recognize, in a bed that wasn't hers, wearing a dress she'd slept in because she'd been too exhausted to do anything else. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came crashing back. She sat up, every muscle protesting. Her mouth tasted like copper and regret. Her hair had come completely loose from its pin sometime during the night, and now hung around her face in a tangled mess. The cabin was silent. She had no idea what time it was. No idea if Caleb was outside or gone or waiting for her to appear. No idea what she was supposed to do next. She found the basin he'd mentioned, a chipped ceramic bowl on a small stand, and splashed water on her face with hands that still shook. Looked at herself in the small mirror hanging above it and barely recognized the face staring back. When had she gotten so thin? When had those shadows appeared under her eyes? Philadelphia felt like a lifetime ago. The woman she'd been there, the woman who'd worked in a factory, who'd shared a boarding house room with 3 other girls, who'd laughed at things and had plans, felt like someone else entirely. That woman wouldn't have lied to a stranger about being a widow, wouldn't have invented a dead husband and a respectable past, wouldn't have gambled her last dollar on a train ticket west and a man who'd promised nothing but a chance. But that woman also hadn't known what it felt like to be truly desperate. Eliza braided her hair with fingers that remembered the motion even when her mind felt slow. Found her other dress in her bag, barely better than the one she'd slept in, and changed into it because at least it was clean. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, the main room was still empty. But there was bread on the table that hadn't been there last night, and a jar of what looked like jam, and a note written in hard, angular handwriting. "Eat something. I'm checking the fence line. Back by noon." Eliza stared at the note for a long moment. Then she sat down at the table and ate bread with jam that tasted like apples in summer, and someone who cared enough to make sure she was fed. And for the first time since Philadelphia, she thought maybe, she might survive this. The morning passed slowly. Eliza washed her face again, properly this time. Washed her hands, looked around the cabin, and tried to figure out what she was supposed to do with herself. Everything was clean but sparse. The stove was cold. The shelves held basic supplies: flour, salt, coffee, a few cans of beans. There was a pump outside for water, which she discovered after some searching. The outhouse was exactly where Caleb had said it would be. By the time the sun was high overhead, she'd managed to make herself feel slightly more human. She'd also discovered that the cabin had exactly 3 books, all of them about cattle ranching, and that Caleb Rourke apparently owned 2 plates, 2 cups, 2 forks, and 1 very dull knife. She was standing at the window, looking out at nothing but grass and sky, when she heard the horse. Caleb appeared from the north, riding a bay mare that looked half dead with exhaustion. He dismounted near the barn and led the horse inside without looking toward the cabin. Eliza watched him disappear, then reappear a few minutes later without the horse. He walked toward the cabin with the same unhurried pace he'd used the night before, like time was something that happened to other people. The door opened. He stopped just inside the threshold when he saw her standing there. "You eat?" he asked. "Yes, thank you." He nodded, took off his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. His hair was dark, longer than was fashionable, and stuck to his forehead with sweat. "Fence is fixed," he said to no one in particular. "Got about 3 more sections to check this week." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Caleb moved to the basin and washed his hands with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Then he went to the stove and started building a fire. "You know how to cook?" he asked without turning around. "Some." "Good, because I can barely manage beans and coffee." He got the fire going, added wood from the stack. "There's a root cellar outside, around the back. Potatoes, carrots, a couple of onions. If you wanted to make something that wasn't bread and jam, I wouldn't complain." It wasn't quite a request, wasn't quite an order, just a statement of fact. "All right," Eliza said. She found the root cellar, a small door set into the ground near the back of the cabin, and retrieved vegetables that had definitely seen better days, brought them inside and washed them at the pump, started peeling potatoes because it was something to do with her hands, and because sitting still felt impossible. Caleb watched her for a moment, then seemed to decide she wasn't going to burn the cabin down. He sat down at the table and picked up one of the ranching books. They worked in silence, her at the counter, him at the table. The only sounds were the knife against the cutting board and the occasional rustle of turning pages. It should have been awkward, should have felt wrong, this strange domestic scene with a man she didn't know. But somehow, it didn't. Maybe because neither of them was pretending this was normal. Neither of them was trying to make conversation or fill the quiet with pleasantries that didn't mean anything. They were just existing in the same space, and that was enough. Eliza made soup because that's what you did with old vegetables and not much else. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, and it filled the cabin with a smell that was almost comforting. When it was ready, she ladled it into both bowls and brought them to the table. Caleb looked up from his book, registered the food, and nodded. "Smells good." They ate in continued silence. The soup was actually better than Eliza had expected. The potatoes were soft, the carrots sweet, the broth rich with the onion she'd caramelized first. Caleb finished his bowl and looked at it like he wasn't sure what had just happened. "That was good," he said, and sounded surprised. "It's just soup. Haven't had anything that wasn't burned or undercooked in about 3 years." He stood, took his bowl to the basin. "Thank you." The words were simple, but there was weight behind them. Like gratitude wasn't something he gave easily. "You're welcome," Eliza said quietly. The afternoon stretched out after that. Caleb went back outside to work on something he called the gate. Eliza cleaned up from the meal, then found herself at loose ends again. She wasn't used to idleness. In Philadelphia, she'd worked 12-hour shifts at the factory. Before that, she'd worked in households, cleaning and mending and cooking. There was always something to do, always someone demanding her time. Here, there was just silence and empty hours. She ended up sweeping the cabin floor, even though it didn't need it. Then organizing the shelves, even though they were already organized. Then sitting at the table and staring at her hands because there was nothing left to do. When Caleb came back in at sunset, she was still sitting there. He glanced at her, then at the cabin, and something shifted in his expression. "You're going to go crazy if you just sit here all day," he said. "I don't know what else to do." "You know anything about chickens?" Eliza blinked. "What?" "Chickens. I've been thinking about getting some. Would need someone to tend them, collect eggs, keep the coop clean." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Can't pay you, but you could keep a share of whatever they produce. Sell eggs in town when there's extra. You want me to raise chickens? I want you to have something to do besides stare at the walls and wonder what kind of mistake you've made." His voice was blunt, but not unkind. "You can't just exist here. You'll lose your mind." He wasn't wrong. Eliza had already felt the edges of panic creeping in during the long, empty afternoon. The silence that had seemed peaceful at first was starting to feel oppressive. "I don't know anything about chickens," she admitted. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." It was such a small thing, such a normal thing. But the way he said it, "we'll figure it out together," made something in Eliza's chest loosen. She wasn't alone in this. Whatever this was. "Okay," she said. "Chickens." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, get what we need. You can come if you want, or stay here. Up to you." The thought of going back to Crestfall made Eliza's stomach turn. "I'll stay." Fair enough. He pushed off the doorframe. I'm going to wash up. Then I'll be in the barn if you need anything. He left before she could respond, and Eliza was alone again with her thoughts and the lingering smell of soup and the strange, fragile feeling that maybe this could work. Maybe. That night, Eliza lay in bed and listened to the wind outside. It sounded different here than it had in Philadelphia. Wilder, less certain. She thought about Bernard and Margaret and the crowd on the platform, thought about how easily she'd been discarded, how quickly her lies had unraveled. But she also thought about Caleb's voice cutting through the noise, thought about bread and jam left on a table, thought about a man who'd offered her work instead of charity, who'd given her space instead of judgment. She didn't know what came next, didn't know if she could really build a life here, in this lonely cabin with a stranger who barely spoke, in a town that had already decided she was worthless. But for the first time in months, she wasn't focused on what she'd lost. She was thinking about what she might be able to build, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The chickens arrived on a Thursday. Caleb came back from town with a wagon full of wire, wood, and a crate that wouldn't stop making noise. Eliza heard the commotion from inside the cabin and came out to find him already unloading supplies. His face set in that expression she was learning meant he was concentrating. "They're loud," she said. "They're chickens." He set down a coil of wire that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. I've never had chickens before." "Well, now you do." He nodded toward the crate. 6 hens. No rooster. Guy at the feed store said roosters are more trouble than they're worth. Eliza approached the crate carefully. 6 pairs of beady eyes stared back at her through the slats. One of the birds made a sound like a rusty door hinge. "They look mean." "They're chickens," Caleb repeated, like that explained everything. He grabbed another load of wood. "Coop's going to go over there, past the garden plot. Ground's good, gets morning sun. You want to help or just stand there judging the livestock?" She should have been offended. Instead, she found herself almost smiling. "What do you need me to do?" "Hold boards while I nail them. Try not to let the chickens escape." It took them 3 days to build the coop. 3 days of Caleb measuring and cutting while Eliza held things steady and tried to understand his abbreviated instructions. 3 days of splinters and mistakes and one spectacular moment when the whole frame collapsed because she'd moved her hands at the wrong time. Caleb had looked at the wreckage, then at her, then back at the wreckage. "Well," he'd said finally, "that's one way to do it. I'm sorry, I thought you said, I know what I said, and you heard something different. Let's try it again." No blame, no anger, just the flat acceptance that things went wrong sometimes and you fixed them and moved on. By the time they finished, Eliza's hands were covered in small cuts, and her back ached in places she hadn't known could ache. But the coop stood, sturdy and square, with a roosting bar inside and a nesting box Caleb had built from scrap lumber. "Not bad," he said, walking around it one more time to check for gaps. "They'll be warm enough, safe from coyotes mostly." "Mostly?" "Nothing's guaranteed out here." He pulled the door open and shut a few times, testing the hinges. "But this'll do." They transferred the chickens that evening, one by one. The birds squawked and flapped and made it clear they had opinions about the whole process. Eliza got pecked twice. Caleb got pecked once but didn't react, just tucked the offending hen under his arm and deposited her in the coop like nothing had happened. When the last bird was settled and the door was latched, they stood back and watched through the wire as the chickens explored their new home with jerky, suspicious movements. "Think they like it?" Eliza asked. "Don't think chickens like anything, but they'll lay eggs here, and that's what matters." The sun was setting again, turning everything gold and orange. Eliza had stopped being surprised by the sunsets out here. They happened every day with the same impossible colors, like the sky was showing off. "I talked to someone in town," Caleb said after a moment. His voice was carefully neutral. "While I was getting the supplies." Eliza's stomach tightened. "About me?" "About the situation." He didn't look at her, just kept watching the chickens. "Word spread about you being here. I figured it would. Some people are saying things, the kind of things people say when they've got nothing better to do with their time." He paused. "Margaret Hutchins is telling everyone you're that you're not respectable, That I'm not respectable for taking you in. The words landed like stones. Eliza had known this was coming, had braced herself for it, but hearing it still hurt. I can leave, she said quietly. If it's causing you trouble. Didn't say that. Caleb finally turned to look at her. His eyes were hard to read in the fading light. I'm telling you so you know, so you're not surprised if someone says something or if things get uncomfortable when you go to town. When I go to town, I'm not going back there. You'll have to eventually. Can't hide out here forever. Watch me. Something almost like amusement crossed his face. You're going to let Margaret Hutchins decide where you can and can't go? That what you want? I want to not be humiliated again. Then don't give her the satisfaction of seeing you hide. He turned back toward the cabin. But that's your choice. I'm just saying, running from something doesn't make it go away. Usually makes it worse. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing there with the chickens and the sunset and the uncomfortable feeling that he was right. The days started to develop a rhythm after that. Caleb would leave early to work on whatever needed fixing: fences, gates, the barn door that hung crooked, the water pump that made a grinding noise. Eliza would tend the chickens, gathering eggs that appeared with miraculous regularity, cleaning the coop, refilling their water. Then she'd work on the cabin, not because Caleb asked her to, but because she couldn't stand the emptiness of it. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, organized shelves that didn't need organizing, mended a tear in the curtain that hung over the bedroom window. She also started cooking. Real cooking, not just soup from old vegetables. She found a cookbook wedged behind the flour canister, stained and dog-eared, with notes in the margins written in handwriting that definitely wasn't Caleb's. She didn't ask about it, just used the recipes and tried not to think about who'd written those notes or where they'd gone. Caleb never commented on the improvements, never thanked her for the meals that started appearing with actual seasoning and effort. But she noticed he came in for dinner right on time every evening, noticed he cleaned his plate, noticed the way he'd pause sometimes, fork halfway to his mouth, like he was trying to remember something. They didn't talk much during those dinners. Caleb wasn't much for conversation, and Eliza was still learning how to exist in the silence without feeling like she was drowning in it. But there were moments, small ones, like when she burned a batch of biscuits so badly they came out of the oven looking like charcoal, and Caleb had looked at them, looked at her, and said, "Well, at least the chickens will eat good tonight." Or when he came in one evening with a book that wasn't about ranching, a collection of short stories, worn soft from reading, and set it on the table without saying anything. Just left it there like it was no big thing, like he hadn't noticed her staring at his cattle ranching books with the kind of desperation that comes from having nothing else to read. Or when she'd mentioned casually that she'd like to plant a garden come spring, and he'd said, "Ground's good for it. There's tools in the barn if you want to start marking it out." Not permission, not approval, just acknowledgement that she was thinking about being here in the spring, and he wasn't going to tell her that was foolish. 3 weeks after the chickens arrived, Eliza had her first egg customer. She'd been in the yard, hanging laundry on the line Caleb had strung up between two posts, when she heard a wagon approaching. Her first instinct was to run inside and hide. Her second was to remember Caleb's words about not letting Margaret Hutchins decide where she could go. She stayed where she was, pinning a shirt to the line with hands that wanted to shake. The wagon pulled up, and a woman climbed down, older, with gray hair and a face like sun-dried leather. She walked right up to Eliza without hesitation. "You the one with the eggs?" she asked. Eliza blinked. Yes, we have chickens." "Heard you might have some to sell. Mine stopped laying last month, and the feed store's charging robbery prices." The woman looked her up and down, not unkindly. "You got any today?" "I collected 6 this morning." "I'll take 4. What are you asking?" Eliza had no idea what eggs cost. She'd never bought them herself, had always just eaten whatever the boarding house provided. 3 cents each? The woman snorted. "Highway robbery. I'll give you 10 cents for 4. "That's less than 3 cents each." "You're new at this, aren't you?" But the woman was smiling. "Tell you what, 12 cents for 4, and I'll spread the word you've got quality eggs. Deal?" Eliza found herself nodding. Deal. She went to the cabin and retrieved 4 eggs from the bowl where she'd been keeping them, wrapped them carefully in an old newspaper, and brought them out. The woman inspected each one, nodded approval, and counted out 12 cents in coins that felt heavy in Eliza's palm. "Name's Ruth," the woman said as she climbed back onto her wagon. I live about 2 miles west. You ever need anything, you come find me. Don't let the town gossips get to you. Most of them are just mad they didn't think to snag Caleb Rourke first. She was gone before Eliza could process that last sentence. Caleb came in that evening to find her staring at the 12 cents on the table like they might disappear. Someone buy eggs? He asked. A woman named Ruth. She said she'd spread the word. He grunted. Ruth Callahan. She's good people. If she says she'll spread the word, she will. She said something else, too. Eliza looked up at him. About the gossips being mad they didn't snag you first. What did she mean? Caleb's expression closed off. Nothing. Just talk. It's not nothing if... It's nothing, he repeated, and his tone made it clear the subject was done. But Eliza had caught something in his face before he'd shuttered it, something that looked almost like embarrassment. Ruth was as good as her word. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more people showed up looking for eggs. Then 5. Then Eliza lost count. By the time autumn started turning toward winter, she had a regular route. 7 households that bought eggs weekly, and another 4 that came by when they needed them. She kept track of it all in a little notebook Caleb had found somewhere, recording sales and calculating what she owed for the chicken feed. You don't owe me for the feed, Caleb said when she tried to pay him. We agreed I'd keep her share of the profits. The rest should cover costs. I would have bought the feed anyway. You bought chickens because of me. That makes it my expense. She pushed the money across the table. Take it. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Caleb took the money, counted it, and handed half back. Compromise, he said. You cover half the feed, keep the rest. And before you argue, that's the deal. Take it or leave it. Eliza took it, not because she agreed, but because she was starting to understand that Caleb had his own version of pride, and sometimes the kindest thing you could do was let him keep it. The weather turned cold in early November. Not winter yet, but close enough that you could feel it coming. Eliza started wearing her shawl in the mornings and evenings, and Caleb began talking about winterizing the cabin. Chinks need sealing, he said one night at dinner. Couple of the window frames are loose. Stove's fine, but we'll need more wood split before the snow comes. We. He'd said we, like it was assumed she'd be here for winter. I can help split wood, Eliza offered. Caleb looked at her like she'd offered to wrestle a bear. You ever split wood before? No, but I can learn. You'll break something, probably yourself. Then teach me not to. He studied her for a moment. Then he sighed. Fine, tomorrow. But when you throw your back out, don't say I didn't warn you. She threw her back out on the 3rd day. Not badly, just enough to remind her that swinging an axe was harder than it looked, and her body wasn't used to that kind of work. She'd been trying to split a particularly stubborn log when something in her lower back had seized up, sending a spike of pain down her leg. She didn't make a sound, just set the axe down carefully and stayed very still, trying to breathe through it. Caleb noticed anyway. He was across the yard, but somehow he knew. He came over, took one look at her face, and said, Inside. Now. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're about 2 seconds from collapsing. Inside. She made it to the cabin through sheer stubbornness, but by the time she reached the door, the pain was making her vision blur. Caleb guided her to a chair, not touching, just hovering close enough to catch her if she fell. Where? He asked. Lower back, left side. He disappeared into the bedroom and came back with a jar of something that smelled like mint and burning. This is going to hurt worse before it helps. You want me to do it, or you want to try yourself? The idea of twisting around to reach her own back made her want to cry. You. Shirt up. She hesitated, then pulled her shirt up just enough to expose her lower back. Felt the cold air on her skin and tried not to think about how vulnerable this felt. Caleb's hands were rough and warm. He applied the salve with quick, efficient movements. No gentleness, but no cruelty either. Just the mechanical touch of someone who'd done this before, who knew that sometimes healing hurt. He was right. It burned like fire, worse than the original injury. Eliza bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. Breathe, Caleb said. It'll pass. It did eventually. The burning faded to a deep warmth, and the seized muscle started to unclench. Eliza's breathing evened out. Better? He asked. Yes, thank you. He was already washing his hands at the basin, putting distance between them. You're done with wood splitting. That's final. You can still collect eggs and cook and do about 100 other things, but you're not splitting wood. I don't need you laid up all winter because you're too stubborn to admit when something's too much. There was an edge to his voice. Not anger, exactly. Something sharper. You did this to yourself once, Eliza said quietly. It wasn't a question. Caleb went very still. What makes you say that? The way you knew exactly what to do, the way you moved. You've treated this injury before. He didn't answer for a long time. Then, yeah, I have. What happened? Same thing that happened to you. Tried to do too much, didn't stop when I should have, paid for it. He dried his hands on a towel, still not looking at her. Difference was, I didn't have anyone to tell me to stop. Threw my back out so bad I couldn't move for 3 days. Had to crawl to the water barrel. Thought I was going to die out here and nobody would know until the smell got bad enough to notice. The words were flat, matter of fact, but underneath them was something raw. That why you live alone? Eliza asked. Because no one was here when you needed them? I live alone because that's what works. He finally turned to look at her. And you're changing the subject. Point is, you don't do things that'll break you. Not here. Out here, an injury can kill you if you're not careful. I'll be careful. You'll be smart. There's a difference. He left before she could argue, heading back outside to finish the wood she'd started. Eliza sat at the table, feeling the warmth of the salve spreading across her back, and thought about a man crawling to a water barrel because he had no one to help him. Thought about how lonely that must have been. That night she found him in the barn. He was sitting on his cot, a book open in his lap, but his eyes staring at nothing. You don't have to sleep out here anymore, she said from the doorway. He looked up, surprised. What? It's getting too cold. You'll freeze like... I've got blankets. It's still too cold. She took a breath. There's room in the cabin. You could take the bedroom. I'll sleep in the main room. No. Or we could both sleep in the main room. I could take the floor. Eliza. His voice cut through her rambling. I appreciate the thought, but no. This works. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're freezing every night because you gave me your bed, and that's my choice. He stood up, and she realized how tall he was, how much space he took up. I sleep out here because it's easier, because it keeps things clear. You understand? She didn't, not really, but she could see he wasn't going to budge. At least take another blanket, she said. I've got enough blankets. Then take the quilt from the bedroom. I don't need it. Eliza, just take it. She turned and walked back to the cabin before he could argue, grabbed the quilt from the bed, heavy, handmade, probably the warmest thing in the entire place, and brought it back, shoved it at him. Please. He looked at her, at the quilt, back at her. Something in his expression softened. All right, he said quietly. Thank you. She nodded and left before the moment could get any more complicated than it already was. Winter arrived in earnest 2 weeks later. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. Eliza woke up one morning to find frost covering the windows and her breath visible in the air. The chickens huddled together in their coop, fluffed up like angry cotton balls. Eliza had to break ice on their water dish before she could refill it. Told you it'd get cold, Caleb said when she came back inside, shivering. I didn't think you meant this cold. This is nothing. Wait till January. She didn't want to think about January. She was barely handling November. But she learned to layer clothes in ways that would have been scandalous back east, but here were just practical. Learned to keep the stove going all day, feeding it wood in careful increments. Learned to wrap her hands before going outside because frostbite was real and quick and permanent. Caleb taught her without seeming to teach. Just did things and let her watch. Showed her how to bank a fire so it'd last through the night. How to tell when the chickens were too cold and needed extra bedding. How to walk on ice without falling. She failed at that last one, twice. The second time, she went down hard enough to knock the wind out of her lungs. Lay there on her back, staring up at the white sky, trying to remember how breathing worked. Caleb appeared above her, blocking out the light. You hurt? Just my pride. He offered a hand, pulled her up with the same efficiency he did everything else. Pride heals faster than bones. Watch where you step. but his hand lingered on her arm for just a second longer than necessary, making sure she had her balance, making sure she was really okay. It was the most tender thing he'd done since she'd arrived, and it was over so fast she might have imagined it. December brought snow. Real snow, the kind that covered everything and made the world quiet. Eliza had seen snow before, but never like this. Never so complete. The isolation became absolute. No one came to buy eggs. No wagons passed on the distant road. It was just the two of them, and the animals, and the endless white. She should have hated it, should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to peace. They fell into new rhythms. Longer dinners because there was nowhere else to be. Evenings spent reading by the stove, Caleb with his ranching books, and Eliza with the short story collection he'd given her. Sometimes they'd read passages aloud, not to each other exactly, just into the shared space. Sometimes they'd talk. Small things, nothing deep. Caleb would mention a fence that needed fixing come spring. Eliza would talk about maybe expanding the chicken coop, safe topics, surface things. But every now and then something real would slip through. Like the night Eliza mentioned Philadelphia and found herself telling him about the factory, about the noise and the heat and the feeling of being just another part of a machine, about the boarding house where she'd shared a room with 3 other girls and never had a moment of quiet. "Is that why you answered Bernard's ad?" Caleb asked. "To get away?" "Partly." She stared into her coffee cup. "Mostly I just wanted something different. Thought maybe I could have a life that was mine, you know? Not just surviving day to day." "How's that working out?" She looked up at him. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in his eyes that might have been humor. "Better than expected," she said. Considering you got publicly humiliated and ended up stuck in a cabin with a stranger? Considering I burned those biscuits last week and you still ate them." That surprised a laugh out of him. A real one, rough and unpracticed, like he'd forgotten how. It changed his whole face, made him look younger, less haunted. "Those biscuits were terrible," he admitted. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be. Gave me something to complain about. I need that sometimes." The moment hung there between them, fragile and strange and something Eliza didn't know how to name. Then Caleb stood up, breaking it. "I'm going to check on the horses. You need anything before I head out?" "No, I'm fine." He nodded and left, and Eliza sat there feeling like something had just shifted. Some invisible line had been crossed. She just didn't know if that was a good thing or not. Christmas came and went without ceremony. Neither of them mentioned it. Eliza made a nicer dinner than usual. Roast chicken from one of the older hens who'd stopped laying, potatoes, carrots, even an attempt at pie that came out lopsided but edible. Caleb ate it all and didn't comment on the effort she'd put in. But the next morning, there was a new coat hanging on the peg by the door. Heavy wool lined with flannel, sized for a woman. "Found it in town last time I was there," Caleb said when she stared at it. "Thought you might need it. Gets colder from here." "I can't. It's not a gift. It's practical. You can't tend chickens if you freeze to death." But his ears were red, and he wouldn't meet her eyes, and Eliza understood that this was as close to sentiment as Caleb Rourke was going to get. "Thank you," she said softly. He grunted and left. She wore the coat every day after that, and it was perfect. January proved Caleb right about the cold. The kind of cold that made the previous months feel like practice. The kind that crept into the cabin through cracks you couldn't see and settled into your bones like it planned to stay. Eliza woke one morning to find ice on the inside of the windows. The water in the basin had frozen solid overnight despite the banked fire. She could see her breath hanging in the air, thick as smoke. She pulled on every layer she owned, including the coat Caleb had given her, and went outside to tend the chickens. 3 steps from the door, she stopped. The world had disappeared. Not literally, but close enough. Snow had fallen during the night, so much snow that the barn was barely visible through the white curtain. The chicken coop was a mound. The fence posts looked like ghosts. "Don't even think about it." She turned to find Caleb behind her, already dressed for weather, his face half hidden by a scarf. The chickens are fine. They're insulated by the snow. You go out there now, you'll be the one who needs help." He moved past her toward the barn. "Stay inside. Keep the fire going. I'll handle the animals." "You can't do everything yourself." "Watch me." He disappeared into the white before she could argue. Eliza stood there for a moment, torn between offense and relief, then went back inside because he was right, and she knew it. She kept the fire going like he'd said. Melted snow for water because the pump was frozen. Made coffee strong enough to strip paint and waited. Caleb came back an hour later, covered in snow and looking half-frozen himself. He stamped his boots at the door, knocked off what snow he could, and came inside trailing cold air and ice. "Chickens are alive," he said through chattering teeth. "Gave them extra feed. Horses are fine. Barn's holding." "You're freezing." "I'm fine." But he wasn't. His hands shook as he tried to unwrap his scarf. His face was gray under the stubble. Eliza took over, unwinding the scarf herself, helping him out of his coat. His fingers were stiff, almost unresponsive. "Sit," she ordered, pushing him toward the stove. For once, he didn't argue, just sank into the chair and held his hands out toward the heat. She poured coffee, added whiskey from the bottle she'd found in the cupboard weeks ago and never mentioned, pressed the cup into his hands and wrapped her own around his to help him hold it. "Drink." He drank. The color started coming back to his face in slow degrees. "How long were you out there?" she asked. "Don't know, lost track." "You could have frozen to death." "But I didn't." He took another sip, and this time his hands were steady enough to hold the cup alone. "Storm's going to last a few days. We're stuck here till it clears." Eliza looked toward the window, at the white nothing beyond. "How do you know?" "Sky was green last night. Winds from the north. Temperature dropped 15 degrees in an hour." He finished the coffee. "I know what a bad storm looks like." "How bad?" "Bad enough that we don't go outside unless the cabin's on fire. Bad enough that we make sure we've got enough wood inside to last. Bad enough that you might get sick of my company." She almost smiled. "I'm already sick of your company." "Good. Means we're even." The storm lasted 4 days. 4 days of wind that howled like something alive. 4 days of snow that piled up past the windows until the cabin felt like a cave. 4 days of being trapped in 3 small rooms with a man who was used to silence and solitude. It should have been unbearable. Instead, it was the strangest 4 days of Eliza's life. They played cards with a deck so old the faces had worn smooth. Caleb won every game until Eliza accused him of cheating, which he denied with a completely straight face while obviously cheating. They read, not side by side this time, but taking turns reading aloud because there was nothing else to do and the silence was starting to feel oppressive. Caleb's voice was rough but steady, and he read the way he did everything, without flourish, just the words themselves. They talked. Real talking. Not the careful surface conversations they'd been having. About small things at first, favorite foods, worst jobs, cities they'd lived in, then bigger things, harder things. "Why'd you really leave Philadelphia?" Caleb asked on the second day while they were splitting the last of the bread. Eliza had been waiting for this question, dreading it. "I told you I wanted something different." "That's not the whole story." "It's enough of it." "Is it?" He wasn't pushing, exactly. Just leaving space for her to fill if she wanted to. She didn't want to. But she also didn't want to keep carrying it alone. "There was a man," she said finally. "At the factory. Foreman. He decided he liked me, and when I said no, he made sure I understood that was the wrong answer." Caleb went very still. "Did he?" "No. But only because I left before he could. Quit the job, left the boarding house, spent everything I had on that train ticket." She stared at her hands. "Bernard's ad made it sound like a fresh start. A place where nobody knew me, where I could be someone respectable." "You are respectable." "I'm a liar who invented a dead husband and got caught. You're a woman who did what she had to do to survive. There's a difference." The words were simple, but they hit something deep inside her chest. Something that had been tight and painful for months. "What about you?" she asked, needing to deflect. "Why do you live out here alone?" She'd asked before, in different ways, but he'd never answered. This time, maybe because of the storm or the whiskey they'd been adding to the coffee, or just because they'd run out of easier things to talk about, he did. "I had a wife," he said. Eliza's world tilted. "Had?" "She died. 5 years ago, month after we got married." His voice was flat, empty. "Fever. Started fast, ended faster. Nothing I could do. nothing anyone could do. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't change anything. He stood up, moved to the window, even though there was nothing to see but white. We met in Crestfall. She worked at the general store. I was doing ranch work for someone else back then, saving to buy my own place. She thought I was brooding and interesting. I thought she was too good for me. Was she? Probably, but she married me anyway. He touched the window, fingers tracing something Eliza couldn't see. We had plans, big ones. We're going to build a house, raise kids, grow old together. All the usual dreams. What was her name? Sarah? The name came out soft, like something precious. Sarah Rourke for exactly 32 days. Then she was gone, and I was alone in this cabin with all these plans that didn't mean anything anymore. Eliza didn't know what to say. Every response felt inadequate. The town tried to help at first, Caleb continued, brought food, offered sympathy, told me she was in a better place, that time would heal, all the things people say when they don't know what else to do. He turned away from the window. But they also watched, waited to see what I'd do, who I'd become. And when I didn't fall apart the way they expected, when I just kept working and living and not talking about it, they decided I was cold, unfeeling, started saying maybe I'd never really loved her at all. That's cruel. That's people. They want grief to look a certain way. When it doesn't, they get uncomfortable. He sat back down, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked tired. Not physically, something deeper. Margaret was the worst. She and Sarah were friends. After Sarah died, Margaret decided she knew what Sarah would have wanted. Started showing up uninvited, reorganizing things, trying to fix me. When I told her to stop, she got Bernard involved. They tried to force me to sell this place, move to town, rejoin society. That's why they hate you. That's why they hate me. I wouldn't perform my grief for them. Wouldn't let them turn Sarah's death into a community project. He looked at Eliza directly. So when I saw them doing the same thing to you, turning your mistakes into entertainment, I guess I'd had enough. The pieces were clicking into place. Why he'd stepped in at the train station. Why he understood about not giving Margaret the satisfaction. Why he lived alone and kept everyone at arm's length. You saved me because you knew what it felt like, Eliza said. I saved you because they needed someone to tell them to shut up. You just happened to be the one they were targeting that day. But there was something in his eyes that made her think he was lying, or at least not telling the whole truth. On the third day, cabin fever started setting in for real. The space that had felt cozy began to feel suffocating. Every small sound became amplified. Every movement seemed too loud. They started getting on each other's nerves in ways they hadn't before. You're hovering, Caleb said when Eliza checked the fire for the third time in an hour. I'm making sure we don't freeze to death. The fire's fine. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. I've been sitting for 2 days. Then go in the bedroom. I've been in the bedroom. There's nothing to do in the bedroom. Then read something. I've read everything twice. Then be bored quietly. She wanted to throw something at him. Instead, she started pacing, which was worse because the cabin was too small for pacing. You're going to wear a hole in the floor, Caleb muttered. Good, maybe I'll fall through and have something interesting to do. He looked up from his book. You want to go outside? Be my guest. I'll dig you out when the storm's over. Don't tempt me. They glared at each other for a long moment. Then Caleb sighed and set down his book. Come here. Why? Just come here. She crossed the room suspiciously. He stood up, moved the table against the wall with one shove, and suddenly there was open floor space. What are you doing? Teaching you something useful. He pulled off his boots. Take your boots off. Caleb, just do it. She did, too curious to argue. He waited until she was barefoot, then positioned himself in the center of the cleared space. My brother taught me this when we were kids. Winter game for when you couldn't go outside. He held out his hands, palms up. Put your hands on mine. What? You want something to do or not? Eliza placed her hands on his, palms down. His skin was warm, rough with calluses. Now push, he said. What? Push against my hands. Try to make me move. She pushed. He didn't budge. Harder. She pushed harder. He leaned into it, and suddenly it was a contest. She was using all her strength and he was barely trying, but at least it was something to do besides pace. Switch, he said after a minute. Now you resist. I'll push. They went back and forth like that, pushing and resisting, finding the balance point where they were both straining, but neither was winning. It was ridiculous. It was childish. It was exactly what they both needed. They ended up on the floor somehow, both breathing hard, both laughing in a way that felt slightly unhinged. Your brother taught you that? Eliza asked, staring at the ceiling. Yeah, we'd go for hours. Drove our mother crazy. Where is he now? California, last I heard. Haven't talked to him in years. Caleb's smile faded. We don't keep in touch. Why not? He didn't come to Sarah's funeral. Said he couldn't get away from work. I told him if he couldn't be bothered to show up when it mattered, he didn't need to show up at all. He sat up slowly. Haven't talked since. That's sad. That's life. People leave. People disappoint you. Better to not expect anything in the first place. Eliza sat up too, and they were close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes. Close enough to see the small scar on his chin she'd never noticed before. Is that what you expect? She asked quietly. That I'll disappoint you? I expect you'll leave when spring comes. Find something better. Someone better. That's what people do. What if I don't? Then you're foolish. I've been called worse. Something shifted in the air between them. Something that made Eliza's pulse pick up for reasons that had nothing to do with the exercise they'd just done. Caleb stood abruptly, breaking the moment. I'm going to check the fire. The fire that was fine. That didn't need checking. Eliza stayed on the floor and tried to figure out what had just happened. On the fourth day, the storm broke. Not gradually, but suddenly, like someone had finally remembered to turn it off. Eliza woke to silence, real silence, without the howling wind, and actual sunlight coming through the window. She got up and looked outside. The world was white and still and looked like something from a storybook, beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Caleb was already up, already dressed. Storm's over. I'm going to dig us out. You should probably stay. I'm helping. Eliza, I'm helping. He looked like he wanted to argue, then shrugged. Fine, but you're shoveling the path to the chicken coop. I'll handle the barn. It took them most of the day to dig out. The snow was heavier than Eliza expected, wetter. Her arms burned, her back ached. But it felt good to be doing something physical again, to be outside in the cold air and the impossible sunlight. The chickens had survived, grumpy but intact. The horses were fine. The cabin had held. They'd made it through. That night, Eliza made stew from the last of the vegetables and some dried beef. They ate in comfortable silence, too tired for conversation. Thank you, she said finally. Caleb looked up. For what? For keeping me sane. For teaching me that stupid pushing game. For not letting me go outside and freeze to death. You would have done the same. Would I? Yeah, you would. He mopped up the last of his stew with bread. You're tougher than you think. I don't feel tough. Tough people never do. That's how you know they're actually tough and not just pretending. It was maybe the nicest thing he'd ever said to her. Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the stew. 2 days after the storm cleared, they had visitors. Eliza heard the wagon first and felt her stomach drop. Visitors meant questions, meant judgment, meant the outside world intruding on the fragile peace they'd built. She came outside to find not one wagon, but 3, all pulled up in front of the cabin. Ruth Callahan was in the first one. Behind her were 2 other women Eliza vaguely recognized from her egg rounds. Heard about the storm, Ruth called out, climbing down from her wagon. Came to check you were still breathing. We're fine, Eliza said, too surprised to be defensive. Good, because we brought supplies. Ruth gestured to the other women who started unloading crates. Figured you'd be running low after being snowed in. You didn't have to. Of course we didn't have to. We wanted to. Ruth looked around. Where's Caleb? Checking the fence line. Storm knocked some posts loose. He'll want to see this. Ruth waited while the women carried the crates to the porch. Fresh bread, smoked ham, preserves, coffee, sugar. Helen made her apple butter. You haven't lived till you've tried it. And Martha brought fabric, Said you might want to make some new curtains or something. These are looking rough. Eliza didn't know what to say. She'd been bracing for hostility, not kindness. Why? She asked finally. Ruth cocked her head. Why what? Why are you being nice to me? The town's got some loud mouths who like to talk. But we're not all like Margaret Hutchins, if that's what you're thinking. Ruth's voice was firm. You showed up with nothing, got treated like dirt, and you're still here, still working, still trying. That means something to folks. But I lied about who I was. Honey, half the people in this territory lied about who they were before they got here. You think anyone actually believes Bernard Hutchins is really from Boston? Man can't tell a clam from a cockle. Ruth laughed. Point is, what you were doesn't matter. What you're doing now does. And what you're doing is making a go of it without complaining. People respect that. The other women had finished unloading and were standing nearby, nodding agreement. Plus, one of them, Helen, added, Margaret's been insufferable lately, talking about how you'll come crawling back any day, begging for forgiveness. Watching you stay out here and thrive is driving her crazy. I'm not thriving. You're still here, aren't you? That's thriving enough. Ruth patted her shoulder. Anyway, we won't keep you. Just wanted to make sure you had what you needed. Storm season's not over yet. They were climbing back into their wagons when Caleb appeared, walking across the snow with his usual steady pace. He stopped when he saw the group, his expression wary. Ruth, he said, nodding. Caleb, brought you some supplies, figured you could use them. Didn't need to do that. I know you didn't. We did it anyway. She settled into her seat. You two take care of each other, you hear? Then they were gone, leaving Eliza and Caleb standing in the snow, surrounded by crates of food they hadn't asked for but desperately needed. That was unexpected, Eliza said. Ruth's like that. Caleb picked up one of the crates. Decides she likes you, and that's it. You're adopted. She said people respect what I'm doing, that what I was doesn't matter. She's right. You believe that? He looked at her over the top of the crate. I'm standing here, aren't I? They carried the supplies inside together, and Eliza felt something settle in her chest. Something that felt dangerously like hope. That night after dinner, Caleb cleared his throat in a way that meant he had something to say and wasn't sure how to say it. Been thinking, he started. That sounds dangerous. He ignored that. Spring's going to come eventually. When it does, you're going to have to make some decisions. Eliza's stomach tightened. What kind of decisions? Whether you stay, whether you go, what you want to do with yourself. He wasn't looking at her, just staring into his coffee cup. I'm not going to keep you here if you want to leave. But if you want to stay, we should probably figure out how that works. How what works? This, us, the arrangement. He shifted uncomfortably. Right now, people think you're here temporarily, that you're going to leave when the weather clears or when you save enough money. But if you stay permanent they're going to talk. They already are talking. I know. And that doesn't bother you. It bothers me less than being alone in Philadelphia did. Less than watching Bernard humiliate me in front of the whole town. Less than a lot of things. She met his eyes. Does it bother you? I stopped caring what people thought about me 5 years ago. Then what are you saying? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm saying if you want to stay, you should stay. And if people have a problem with that, that's their problem, not ours. Ours. Such a small word, such a big meaning. I want to stay, Eliza said quietly. You sure? Because once you decide it's going to be harder to leave, people will make assumptions, draw conclusions. Let them. Caleb nodded slowly. All right then. We'll make this work. How? Same way we've been making it work, day by day. You keep your chickens, I keep my ranch. We help each other when we need to. We stay out of town's business, they stay out of ours. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't romantic. It was practical and simple and exactly like Caleb. And somehow, it was perfect. February brought a thaw that turned the snow to mud and the world to various shades of brown. It also brought more visitors, people buying eggs, people checking fences with Caleb, people who'd heard about the woman staying at the Rourke place and wanted to see for themselves. Most were kind. A few were curious in the wrong way. Margaret showed up once, ostensibly to buy eggs, but really to inspect. How cozy, she said, looking around the cabin with sharp eyes. Just the two of you out here, all winter. Must have been quite an adjustment. We managed, Eliza said coolly. I'm sure you did. Margaret's smile was thin. Though I wonder what people will think when they hear about the arrangements. A single woman living with a single man. No chaperone. No propriety. People will think what they want to think. They always do. Indeed they do. And what they're thinking is quite scandalous, I assure you. Eliza felt her temper rising, but kept her voice level. Did you want eggs, or just gossip? Margaret's smile vanished. I don't appreciate your tone. And I don't appreciate you coming to my home to insult me. We're even. This isn't your home. Yes, it is. Caleb's voice came from the doorway. Neither of them had heard him approach. This is her home, and you're not welcome here. Margaret turned, her face flushing. Caleb, you were only leaving. Now. You can't speak to me like that. I just did. Get off my property. Margaret left in a storm of indignation, her wagon kicking up mud as she drove away too fast. Eliza let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have... You shouldn't have what? Stood up for yourself? Told her to mind her own business? Caleb closed the door. You did fine. Better than fine. She's going to make trouble. Let her. We've got bigger things to worry about. Like what? He looked at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't read. Like whether you're going to keep burning biscuits or if I need to take over the baking. She threw a dish towel at him. He caught it without blinking. And just like that, the tension broke. March came in like something angry. Not winter anymore, but not quite spring either, just mud and gray skies and a wind that couldn't decide what temperature it wanted to be. The chickens laid fewer eggs, the horses got restless, and Eliza started noticing things she'd been too cold or too busy to notice before, like the way Caleb's hands shook sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, or how he'd stand at the window in the evening staring out at nothing, his jaw tight, or how he'd wake up at night. She could hear him moving around in the barn, pacing, unable to settle. She didn't ask about it, had learned by now that Caleb would talk when he was ready, and pushing only made him retreat further, but it worried her. You going to town today? She asked one morning over breakfast. He'd mentioned needing supplies. Yeah, need anything? More flour, sugar if they have it, and I wanted to ask about selling some of the eggs to the general store. Ruth said they might take them regular. Caleb looked up from his coffee. You could come with me. Do the negotiating yourself. The suggestion caught her off guard. You thought what? That you were going to hide out here forever? His voice wasn't unkind, just matter of fact. You can't avoid town forever, Eliza. Might as well go now while the weather's decent. He was right. She knew he was right. But the thought of walking down that main street, of seeing Bernard or Margaret or any of the people who'd watched her humiliation like it was theater, made her stomach turn. What if nothing? You go in there with your head up, you do your business, and you leave. Anyone says anything, you ignore them. That's how it works. Easy for you to say. You think it's easy for me? He set down his cup harder than necessary. You think I don't hear what they say? That I don't know exactly what they're thinking every time I show my face? Then why go at all? Because the alternative is letting them win, is letting them decide where I can and can't be. And I've had enough of that to last a lifetime. He stood up, grabbed his coat. You're coming or you're not. Decide now. Eliza looked at him, at the stubborn set of his jaw, at the challenge in his eyes. Thought about what Ruth had said about what mattered being what you did now, not what you'd been. I'm coming. Good. Be ready in 10 minutes. The ride to town was quiet. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, and Eliza kept her hands folded in her lap to hide the shaking. The closer they got, the tighter her chest felt. Crestfall looked different in daylight without the drama of her arrival. Just a collection of buildings that had seen better days, people going about their ordinary lives. The street was busy with wagons and foot traffic. Normal, almost boring, until people started noticing. Eliza felt the moment attention shifted, saw heads turn, heard the sudden drop in conversation volume, felt the weight of eyes following them as Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store. Ignore them, he said quietly, climbing down. She tried. Really tried. But it was hard when every face she saw seemed to be either judging or pitying or curious in that ugly way that wanted details to spread later. The general store was warm and smelled like coffee and sawdust. The man behind the counter, older with a gray beard and suspicious eyes, looked up when they entered. "Caleb," he said neutrally. Then to Eliza, "Ma'am." "Mr. Porter," Caleb's voice was equally neutral. "Need to settle my account, and the lady has a business proposition for you." Porter's eyebrows went up. "That's so." Eliza forced herself to step forward. "I have chickens, fresh eggs. I was wondering if you might be interested in buying them regularly for resale." Porter studied her for a long moment. "You the one staying out at Caleb's place?" "I am." He didn't say what he was thinking, which was somehow worse than if he had. "How many eggs we talking about?" "Right now, about 3 dozen a week. More come spring when the hens are laying better." "Quality?" "See for yourself." She pulled a wrapped bundle from her bag, 6 eggs she'd brought as samples. Set them on the counter carefully. Porter picked one up, held it to the light, cracked it into a bowl. The yolk sat up high and golden. He nodded slowly. "Not bad. What are you asking?" 4 cents each. 3 dozen a week would be $1.20. 3 cents. Take it or leave it. Eliza had been ready for this, had watched Ruth negotiate often enough to know how it went. 3.5. And I guarantee freshness. Anything over a week old, you can return. 3.25, and you deliver. Deal. They shook on it. Porter's hand was rough and dry, but his grip was firm, respectful. "Start next week," he said. "Tuesday's work for delivery?" "Tuesday's work fine." Caleb settled his account while Eliza gathered the supplies she needed. She was aware of other customers coming and going, aware of the looks and whispers, but she kept her focus on her list. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt. "That everything?" Porter asked when she brought her items to the counter. "Yes. Thank you." He tallied it up, and she paid with money from her egg sales. Her money, earned by her own work. It felt good. They were loading the wagon when someone called out, "Well, well, look who decided to show her face." Eliza's blood went cold. She turned to see Bernard approaching, Margaret at his side like always. His face was flushed, and she could smell whiskey even from several feet away. "Bernard," Caleb said flatly. "Keep walking." "Why should I? This is a public street. I've got as much right to be here as anyone." Bernard stopped too close, invading space deliberately. Especially more right than her, coming into town like she belongs here, like she didn't lie to everyone. "She's got business here, same as you." "Business." Bernard laughed, mean and sharp. "That what we're calling it now? I heard about your little arrangement out there. Very cozy, very convenient." "Bernard, stop." Margaret's voice held warning. "You promised." "I promised nothing. This woman made a fool of me, made a fool of both of us. And everyone just accepts it? Just lets her waltz around like nothing happened?" People were gathering. Eliza could feel the crowd forming, the same hungry attention from the train platform. Her worst nightmare happening all over again. "We're leaving," Caleb said, his voice tight. "Oh, no you don't. Not until I've said my piece." Bernard stepped closer to Eliza, and she could see the anger in his eyes, the humiliation he'd been nursing for months. "You think you're better than me? Think you can just start over like you didn't do anything wrong?" "I never said I was better than anyone." Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I made mistakes. I lied. I was desperate and stupid, and I'm sorry for that. But I'm also done apologizing to you." "Done apologizing? I ruined what? Your plan to buy a wife like she was livestock? Your chance to look like a respectable man with a respectable woman on your arm?" The words were coming faster now, months of held-back frustration pouring out. "You didn't want a partner, Bernard. You wanted a prop. Something you could show off and feel good about saving. And when I didn't match the picture in your head, you made sure everyone knew it. You're the one who called the crowd. You're the one who made it a show." Bernard's face was turning purple. "How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that you're just as much of a liar as I am? At least I'm honest about what I did wrong." "You have no right." "She has every right." Caleb's voice cut through like a knife. "And you've had your say. Now back off before this gets ugly." "Or what? You'll hit me?" Go ahead, show everyone what kind of man you really are. I'm not going to hit you, Bernard. I'm going to do something worse. Caleb's smile was cold. I'm going to tell everyone here exactly how much you offered me to make her leave. $200. Remember that conversation in the saloon when you were drunk and desperate because Margaret was making your life hell over the whole situation? The color drained from Bernard's face. Margaret went rigid. You offered me money, Caleb continued, voice carrying to the crowd, to throw her out, to send her packing with nothing. And when I said no, you threatened to make trouble, to spread rumors, to make sure neither of us could show our faces in town. He paused. So who's the real liar here? The silence was absolute. Every eye on the street was locked on Bernard, who looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. That's not... You want to stand here and call her a liar? Caleb's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more dangerous. Fine, but take a good look at yourself first, because from where I am standing, you're no better, just louder. Margaret grabbed Bernard's arm. We're leaving, now. They left, Bernard sputtering protests that nobody believed, Margaret's face set in rigid fury. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring, throwing glances back at Eliza and Caleb. Eliza realized she was shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the shock of standing up, from the strange triumph of watching Bernard slink away instead of her. Did he really offer you money? She asked quietly. Yeah, 3 weeks after you showed up. I told him where he could stick it. Why didn't you tell me? Because it didn't matter. Still doesn't. Caleb finished loading the last of the supplies. Come on, let's go home. Home. He'd said home, not the cabin or my place. Home. They were almost to the wagon when Ruth appeared, moving faster than Eliza had ever seen her move. Well done, Ruth said, slightly out of breath. Both of you. About time someone put Bernard in his place. We weren't trying to Oh, you absolutely were trying to, and it worked. Everyone heard. Everyone saw. And let me tell you, Margaret's going to be chewing nails for a week. Ruth grinned. You're officially interesting again, which means half the town's going to be gossiping and the other half's going to be on your side just to spite the gossips. It's perfect. I don't want to be interesting, Eliza said. Too late. You are. Might as well enjoy it. Ruth patted her arm. Besides, you handled yourself well. Stood up straight, told the truth, didn't back down. People respect that more than you think. The ride back was quiet again, but different this time. Caleb seemed looser somehow, less tense, and Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in months, pride. Not the arrogant kind, just the simple satisfaction of having stood her ground. Thank you, she said as the cabin came into view. For what you said about Bernard. I just told the truth. You could have stayed quiet. Let me handle it. You were handling it fine. I just gave you backup. He glanced at her. That's what partners do. Partners. Another small word with weight behind it. They unloaded in comfortable silence, putting away supplies, settling back into the rhythms of the place. Eliza fed the chickens while Caleb saw to the horses. The sun was setting when they finally came back inside, and the cabin felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. I'll make dinner, Eliza said. I'll help. That was new. Caleb had never offered to help cook before, but he pulled out vegetables and started chopping with the same efficient competence he brought to everything else. They worked side by side, not talking much, just existing together in the small space. And Eliza realized she was happy. Not ecstatic, not thrilled, just quietly, steadily happy in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. Dinner was simple but good. They ate at the table and Caleb complimented the seasoning, and it was all so normal it was almost shocking. Storm's coming, Caleb said, looking toward the window. Not like January, but it'll be rough. Should hit tomorrow night. We ready for it? Yeah, got enough wood. Chickens are secure. Barn's tight. He paused. You're getting good at this. At what? Reading the weather? Managing the animals? All of it. He looked at her directly. When you first got here, you didn't know anything. Now look at you. The praise was simple, unadorned, but it hit her right in the chest. I had a good teacher, she said. I didn't teach you much. You just paid attention. Same thing. He almost smiled. Maybe. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. Not because of worry or fear, just restlessness. She got up, wrapped herself in the quilt, and went to the window. The moon was almost full, turning everything silver. She was standing there when she heard the barn door open, saw Caleb emerge, also apparently unable to sleep. He stopped in the yard looking up at the sky. Without thinking about it too hard, Eliza grabbed her coat and went outside. He turned when he heard her approach. "You should be sleeping. So should you." "Can't. Too much in my head." "Me too." They stood there in the cold moonlight, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "What's in your head?" she asked. He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "Sarah, I was thinking about Sarah." Eliza's stomach dropped. "Oh." "Not like that, just today, in town. Standing up to Bernard. I kept thinking she would have liked you. Would have liked how you didn't back down." "You think?" "Yeah, she was like that too. Quiet until she wasn't. Sweet until someone pushed too hard, then she'd go for the throat." He smiled slightly, lost in memory. "First time I met her, she was yelling at a customer who'd tried to shortchange her. Little thing, barely came up to my shoulder, but she had him backing out of the store like his tail was on fire." Eliza could picture it. Could see this woman she'd never met, who'd died too young, who'd left this man alone with his grief and his silence. "You miss her?" "Every day. But differently now. It doesn't hurt the same way it used to." He looked at Eliza. "When she first died, it was like I couldn't breathe, like the world had ended and nobody had bothered to tell me. Everything reminded me of her. Everything hurt. And now? Now I can remember her without feeling like I'm drowning. Can think about the good parts without the bad parts crushing me. Can imagine she'd want me to keep living instead of just surviving." The words hung in the cold air between them. "Is that what you've been doing?" Eliza asked softly. "Just surviving?" "Until you showed up, yeah." Her heart was beating too fast. "And now?" He turned to face her fully, and the moonlight caught his eyes, made them look silver instead of gray. "Now, I don't know. Everything's different, confused. You've been here 6 months and somehow you've changed everything without even trying. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know yet." They were close enough now that Eliza could see the slight catch in his breathing, could see the tension in his shoulders. "Caleb, I should go back to the barn." "You don't have to." "I do." He stepped back, breaking whatever moment had been building. "Because if I don't, I'm going to do something we're both not ready for." He left before she could respond, and Eliza stood there alone in the moonlight, heart pounding, wondering what the hell had just almost happened. The storm hit the next evening like Caleb had predicted. Not as bad as January, but rough enough. Wind that rattled the windows. Rain that turned to sleet, temperature dropping fast. They were prepared this time. Wood stacked inside. Animals secured. Everything battened down. But the tension from the night before hung between them, making everything feel charged. Every accidental touch seemed intentional. Every glance lasted too long. The cabin felt smaller than it ever had. "I'll take the barn again," Caleb said as the wind picked up. "It's too cold. You'll freeze." "I'll be fine." "No, you won't. And this is stupid. We're both adults. We can share space without—" She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Without what?" "Without making it complicated." He looked at her for a long moment. Too late for that. The storm raged outside. Inside, they ate dinner in silence, cleaned up in silence, sat by the fire reading, but Eliza couldn't concentrate on the words. "I'm going to bed," she said finally. "All right." She made it to the bedroom door before his voice stopped her. "Eliza," she turned. "When I said things were different, that everything's confused, I didn't mean it as a bad thing." "Then what did you mean?" "I meant you scare me. Not because of who you are, but because of how much I'm starting to need you here. Starting to imagine what it'd be like if you weren't. And that scares the hell out of me." The confession hung in the air, raw, honest. "You scare me too," she whispered, "because I spent 6 months thinking this was temporary, that I was just passing through, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else. And I don't know what to do with that." The space between them felt electric. Neither moved. "We should probably figure that out," Caleb said. "Yeah, probably." But not tonight. No, not tonight. She went to bed and lay there listening to the storm, listening to Caleb moving around in the main room, listening to her own heart beating too fast. The next morning, the storm had passed, but everything felt different. They moved around each other carefully, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. It was Ruth who broke the stalemate, showing up 2 days later with the news that couldn't wait. "Town meeting tomorrow night," she said, barely inside the door. "Margaret's called for it. She's planning something." "Planning what?" Caleb asked. "Don't know exactly, but she's been gathering support, talking to people. Whatever it is, it's aimed at you two." Eliza felt her stomach drop. Can she actually do anything? Force us to what? Leave? No, but she can make trouble, turn public opinion, make it harder for you to do business. Ruth looked worried. "You should come to the meeting, defend yourselves." "Or we could ignore it," Caleb said, "and let her control the narrative? Let her tell everyone what a scandal you are without you there to counter it?" Ruth shook her head. "Bad idea." "She's right," Eliza said quietly. "We can't just hide." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You want to walk into that? Into whatever trap she's setting?" "I want to stop running, stop letting other people decide what my life looks like." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll go. Together." Ruth left with promises to spread the word that they'd be there, and Eliza tried not to think about what walking into that room would feel like. Tried not to imagine every eye on her, every whisper, every judgment. But she also remembered standing up to Bernard, remembered how it had felt to finally speak her truth. Whatever Margaret had planned, Eliza would face it head on. She was done being afraid. The day of the town meeting dawned gray and cold, like even the weather knew something important was about to happen. Eliza woke early, her stomach already in knots, and found Caleb already up, staring into his coffee like it held answers. "You don't have to do this," he said without looking up. "I can go alone. Tell them whatever they need to hear. We're in this together, remember?" He finally looked at her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "Together means you're going to take whatever they throw at me too. You ready for that?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." The morning passed too slowly and too fast at the same time. Eliza tried to keep busy with her usual tasks, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, making bread that came out dense because she couldn't focus. Caleb worked outside, fixing things that didn't need fixing, his movements sharp with nervous energy. They barely spoke. What was there to say? Ruth showed up around noon with Helen and 2 other women Eliza recognized from her egg routes. "We're coming with you," Ruth announced, climbing down from her wagon. "To the meeting, as witnesses." "You don't need to—" "Yes, we do. Margaret's been working the town for days, and she's got support. You need people in that room who'll speak up for you." Ruth's face was set. "Besides, I'm tired of watching her run roughshod over decent people. Time someone stood up to her properly." "What exactly is she saying?" Caleb asked. Helen stepped forward. "That you're living in sin. That it's a scandal and an embarrassment to the community. That the town should take action to preserve its moral standards." She paused. "She's also saying you're taking advantage of Eliza. That she's vulnerable and you're exploiting that." Eliza felt heat rise to her face. "That's ridiculous." "Of course it is. But Margaret's good at making ridiculous things sound reasonable. She's been reminding everyone about Sarah, about how you've dishonored her memory by taking up with another woman so soon." Caleb went very still. 5 years as soon? "To Margaret it is. She's making it sound like you forgot Sarah the moment someone else showed up." Helen's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry, I know that's not true, but that's what she's saying." The silence that followed was heavy. Eliza watched Caleb's face close off, watched him retreat into himself the way he did when things got too painful. "We should get ready," he said finally. "Meeting starts at 7. The women left with promises to save seats for them. Eliza and Caleb spent the afternoon in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. She changed into her better dress. Not much better, but cleaner. Caleb shaved, put on a shirt that didn't have holes in it. They looked at each other across the cabin, 2 people about to walk into a fight they weren't sure they could win. "Whatever happens," Eliza said, "thank you for everything, for giving me a chance when nobody else would. Don't talk like it's ending. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying, and I'm telling you it's not ending. Not if I have anything to say about it. His voice was rough. You're not getting rid of me that easy. The town hall was packed when they arrived. Every seat taken, people standing along the walls, more crowding near the door. Eliza felt every eye turn toward them as they entered, felt the weight of judgment and curiosity and hostility. Ruth had saved them seats near the front, a strategic choice that put them in full view of everyone. Eliza's hands were shaking as she sat down. Caleb's face was carved from stone. Margaret stood at the front of the room with Bernard beside her, both of them looking pleased with the turnout. The mayor, a thin man named Garrett, who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sat at a table with two council members. "Let's get started," Garrett said, banging a gavel that sounded too loud in the crowded space. "Margaret Hutchins has called this meeting to address a matter of community concern. Margaret, the floor is yours." Margaret stood, smoothing her skirts with deliberate care. She looked around the room, making eye contact with key people, building anticipation. She was good at this, Eliza realized, had probably been planning it for weeks. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret began, her voice carrying easily. "I know it's difficult to leave your homes on a cold evening, but the matter at hand requires our collective attention and action." She paused for effect. 6 months ago, a woman arrived in our town under false pretenses. She lied about her identity, her history, her very character. When exposed, she was rightfully rejected by my fiancé, who had been deceived by her fabrications. Margaret's eyes found Eliza in the crowd. "That woman is Eliza Hart." Murmurs rippled through the room. Eliza kept her face neutral, but her nails were digging into her palms. "Now I understand the concept of second chances. I understand charity and compassion. But there is a difference between helping someone in need and enabling behavior that undermines the very fabric of our community." Margaret turned to gesture at Caleb. Caleb Rourke took this woman into his home, a single man, living alone, no chaperone, no propriety. For 6 months they have been living together in a manner that can only be described as scandalous. More murmurs, louder this time. Someone near the back said, "Here we go." "Some may argue that what happens on private property is private business," Margaret continued. "But when that behavior affects the moral character of our entire community, when it sets an example for our young people that such arrangements are acceptable, then it becomes everyone's business." "Get to the point, Margaret," someone called out. Eliza recognized the voice, one of Ruth's friends. Margaret's smile tightened. "The point is that we must take action to preserve our standards. We must make it clear that Crestfall will not tolerate such arrangements. Therefore, I am proposing that the council formally censure both Caleb Rourke and Eliza Hart, and require that she either leave his property or that they marry immediately to legitimize the situation." The room erupted, voices overlapping, some supporting, some protesting. Garrett banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! We need order!" It took several minutes for the noise to die down. When it finally did, Margaret was still standing, looking satisfied with the chaos she'd created. "Those are your options," she said to Eliza directly. "Leave or marry, because this town will not accept anything else." Eliza's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. This was worse than she'd imagined, worse than humiliation. This was coercion. This was Margaret trying to control her entire life. She started to stand, but Caleb's hand on her arm stopped her. "I'll handle this," he said quietly. "Caleb, trust me." He stood, and the room went silent. Everyone knew Caleb Rourke didn't speak much in public. When he did, it mattered. "You done?" he asked Margaret. "I've said what needed saying." "Good. My turn." He looked around the room, meeting eyes without flinching. "Margaret's right about one thing. Eliza lied when she came here. She was desperate and scared, and she made bad choices. She's admitted that. She's apologized for it. But let's be real clear about something. The person she lied to was Bernard. Not this town, not any of you." The lies affected all of us," Margaret started. "How?" Caleb's voice cut through. "How exactly did her lies affect you, Margaret? Did they make your life harder? Did they hurt you in some way I'm not seeing? Or are you just mad that Bernard got embarrassed and you can't let it go?" Margaret's face flushed. "This isn't about me. It's completely about you. You've been nursing this grudge for 6 months, waiting for your chance to strike back. and now you're trying to dress it up as moral concern when really you just want revenge. That's not true, isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, you don't care about morality or community standards. You care about control. You care about making sure everyone knows you're the one who gets to decide what's acceptable and what's not. The room was dead silent now. Eliza could see people shifting, reconsidering. And let's talk about that scandalous arrangement, Caleb continued. Yeah, Eliza lives in my house, in the bedroom, while I sleep in the barn. Has been that way since day one. Anyone who's visited knows that. Ruth knows it. Porter knows it. Half the people in this room have been to the property and seen the setup. That doesn't change the appearance, Bernard started. The appearance is exactly what it is. A woman who needed help getting it from someone willing to give it. That's called kindness. Used to be this town valued that. Caleb's voice was getting harder now. But sure, let's talk about morality. Let's talk about how moral it is to publicly humiliate someone for being desperate. How moral it is to try and force two people to either separate or marry against their will. How moral it is to use town meetings as weapons for personal grudges. This is outrageous, Margaret sputtered. What's outrageous is you standing there pretending this is about standards when everyone here knows it's about you not getting your way. Caleb took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, steadier. You want to know what's really been happening out at my place? I'll tell you. A woman who had nothing built something. She learned to raise chickens, to manage livestock, to run a small business selling eggs. She learned to survive winter on the prairie. She learned to work harder than most people in this room will ever work. And she did it with no help from this town. No encouragement, nothing but her own determination. He paused, looking at Eliza. Something in his expression made her breath catch. She also taught me something, he said, still looking at her. She taught me that surviving isn't the same as living, that it's possible to let people in without losing yourself, that maybe Sarah wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life alone just to prove how much I loved her. The silence was absolute now. Even Margaret seemed stunned. Caleb turned back to the room. So here's what's going to happen. You can censure us all you want. Won't change anything. Eliza's staying on my property because that's where she belongs. And if that bothers you, if that offends your delicate sensibilities, then don't visit. Don't buy our eggs. Don't talk to us in town. We'll be fine without you. You can't just... Margaret started. I can. And I am. He looked at the mayor. That everything, or is there more we need to sit through? Garrett looked flustered. Well, there's the matter of the vote. Vote on what? Whether you can force two grown adults to live their lives the way you think they should. Caleb's laugh was harsh. Good luck with that. Last I checked, we weren't under your jurisdiction. The community has standards. The community can keep its standards. We'll keep our dignity. He started to walk out, then stopped, turned back. One more thing. Margaret, you said I dishonored Sarah's memory by moving on. You want to know what would actually dishonor her memory? Spending the rest of my life bitter and alone because I'm too afraid to try again. Sarah was a lot of things, but she wasn't cruel. She wouldn't want this for me. And she sure as hell wouldn't want someone using her death as a weapon. His voice cracked slightly on the last words, and Eliza saw the pain there, the grief he still carried, but also something else, something like hope. Then he was walking out, not waiting for a response. Eliza stood quickly to follow, but Ruth caught her arm. Wait, Ruth whispered. Let them see you're not running. Eliza stood there facing the crowd, and suddenly she understood what Ruth meant. Running would look like defeat, like admission of guilt. So she didn't run. She looked at Margaret, who was standing at the front with her mouth opening and closing like a fish. You asked for my side, Eliza said. Her voice was quieter than Caleb's, but it carried. So here it is. I did lie when I came here. I was running from a man who wouldn't take no for an answer, from a life that was crushing me, from a future that looked like nothing but more of the same. I saw Bernard's ad and I lied because I thought that's what he wanted to hear. A respectable widow, someone safe, someone who wouldn't cause trouble. She took a breath. I was wrong to lie, but I was also desperate. And I've spent 6 months trying to make up for it, trying to build something honest, trying to be someone worth knowing. She looked around the room. Some of you have given me that chance. You've bought my eggs. You've treated me with kindness. You've shown me that maybe I can have a fresh start after all. Her eyes found Margaret again. And some of you have decided that one mistake defines everything about me, that nothing I do from here on out will ever be enough to earn forgiveness. That's your choice. But I'm not going to let it define me anymore. She started toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Oh, and Margaret, you said I had two choices, leave or marry. You forgot the third option. There is no third option. Yes, there is. I stay exactly where I am, living exactly how I've been living, and you deal with it, because you don't get to control my life. Nobody does anymore. She walked out to scattered applause that grew louder as she reached the door. Behind her, she could hear the room erupting again, voices arguing, but she didn't stop to listen. Caleb was waiting by the wagon, staring at nothing. He looked up when she approached. That went well, he said dryly. Did it? You stood up for yourself, told them the truth. That's a win in my book. They're going to vote anyway. They're going to censure us. Let them. Piece of paper doesn't change anything. Eliza climbed into the wagon, and Caleb followed. They started back toward the cabin as the sun set, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. They were halfway home when Caleb spoke again. What I said in there, about Sarah, about you teaching me things, I meant that. I know. And the thing about you belonging on my property, I meant that too. Eliza's heart started beating faster. Caleb, let me finish. He kept his eyes on the road. I've been thinking about this for weeks, longer maybe, about what it means that you're there, about what it would mean if you weren't, and I keep coming back to the same thing. What thing? He pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to look at her directly. I don't want you to leave, not in spring, not ever, and not because it's convenient or because you're useful or because I need help with the chickens. His voice was rough. I don't want you to leave because somewhere along the way, you stopped being the woman I took pity on and started being the woman I can't imagine my life without. The world seemed to stop. Everything went quiet except for the sound of her own breathing. You don't have to say anything, Caleb continued. I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just telling you where I stand, so you know. So there's no confusion about what I want. And what do you want? You. Here. Permanently. Not hiding in the barn, not pretending this is temporary. I want us to figure out how to make this real. Eliza's throat was tight. Margaret said we had to marry or... Forget Margaret. This isn't about her. This is about us. About what we want. He reached over, took her hand. His palm was warm against hers. I'm not proposing because the town says I should. I'm not doing it to legitimize anything or save anyone's reputation. I'm doing it because 6 months ago you stumbled into my life and somehow made it worth living again. Caleb, let me ask it properly. He climbed down from the wagon, came around to her side, looked up at her with those gray eyes that had seen too much pain and were now asking for something different, something better. Eliza Hart, will you marry me? Not because you have to, not because it's convenient, but because you want to, because you feel even half of what I feel. Because you can imagine building something real with a broken-down rancher who doesn't talk much and burns everything he tries to cook. She was crying, didn't even realize it until the tears were already falling. I can't cook either, she said. I burn biscuits, remember? Is that a yes? That's a yes. He pulled her down from the wagon, and she fell into his arms, and he caught her like he'd been waiting to catch her all along. His kiss was rough and gentle at the same time, unpracticed but sincere, and it tasted like coffee and hope and coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. We're going to scandalize the whole town, he said. We already did. Fair point. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, and Eliza felt something settle deep in her chest, something that felt like peace, like belonging, like finally finding the place she was supposed to be. The wagon ride home was different than any before it. Caleb held her hand the whole way, thumb tracing circles on her palm. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. Everything important had already been said. When they reached this cabin, he helped her down and then just stood there, looking at her like he still couldn't quite believe she'd said yes. So what happens now? Eliza asked. Now we figure it out, together. He smiled, a real smile, wide and genuine and transforming his whole face. But first, I'm moving back into the cabin. I've spent enough nights freezing in that damn barn. What about propriety? What about it? We're getting married. Let them talk. They went inside together, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Eliza felt like she was really home. Not just occupying space, not just surviving, but actually home. That night, they sat by the fire and made plans. Small ones. When to have the wedding, who to invite, whether to do it in town or somewhere private. And bigger ones. Expanding the chicken coop, building a proper house come summer, maybe getting a milk cow. You realize we're going to have to face everyone eventually, Eliza said. The town, Margaret, all of them. Yeah, but we'll do it together. Caleb looked at her. That's different. Everything's different when you're not alone. The wedding happened 2 weeks later. Not in town, neither of them wanted to deal with that circus, but at the cabin with Ruth and her husband as witnesses and a traveling preacher who asked no questions and took no sides. It wasn't fancy. Eliza wore her better dress, the one she'd worn to the town meeting. Caleb wore clean clothes and shaved. They stood in front of the cabin with the prairie stretching out behind them and said vows that were simple and true. I promise to stand with you, Caleb said, through whatever comes, through storms and summers and everything in between. I promise to listen even when you're not talking, to give you space when you need it, and to hold you when you don't. I promise to be honest, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Eliza's voice shook but held. I promise to build something with you. Not just a life, but a real partnership. I promise to trust you with my truth, even the ugly parts. I promise to stay, even when it's difficult. To choose you every day, not because I have to, but because I want to. The preacher pronounced them married, and Ruth cheered, and Caleb kissed his wife like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it. They had a small celebration. Ruth had brought food, and a few of Eliza's egg customers showed up with gifts and good wishes. It was simple and warm and exactly what they both needed. Bernard and Margaret didn't come. Nobody expected them to. But 3 days after the wedding, Margaret showed up at the cabin alone. Eliza was feeding the chickens when she heard the wagon. Her first instinct was to go inside, to avoid the confrontation. But she'd promised herself she was done running, so she stayed where she was and waited. Margaret climbed down slowly, like she wasn't quite sure she should be there. She looked older than Eliza remembered, more tired. I heard you got married, Margaret said. We did. Without inviting anyone from town. We invited the people we wanted there. Margaret flinched slightly at that. I suppose I deserved that. Eliza waited. Didn't make this easy for her. I came to apologize, Margaret said finally. The words sounded like they were being dragged out of her. For the town meeting, for trying to force your hand. That was wrong. Yes, it was. I was angry. I've been angry for months. At you, at Caleb, at Bernard, at everyone. She looked away. Sarah was my best friend. When she died, it felt like I lost everything. And when Caleb moved on, when he brought you here, it felt like he was erasing her, like she didn't matter. He never forgot her, Eliza said quietly. He still hasn't. He never will. I know that now. But at the time, all I could see was him replacing her, being happy with someone else when Sarah was gone. Margaret's voice cracked. It wasn't fair to you or to him. I was using her death as an excuse to control things I had no right to control. Eliza studied her, trying to gauge if this was genuine or just another manipulation. But Margaret looked broken in a way that seemed real. I accept your apology, Eliza said carefully. But that doesn't mean we're friends. That doesn't mean I trust you. I know. I don't expect that. Margaret turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think Sarah would have liked you. She always did root for the underdog. Then she was gone, leaving Eliza standing there with the chickens, trying to process what had just happened. Caleb found her there 10 minutes later, still holding the feed bucket, staring at nothing. You all right? He asked. Margaret was here. She apologized. His eyebrows went up. Really? Yeah, said she was wrong. Said Sarah would have liked me. Huh. He was quiet for a moment. You believe her? I don't know. Maybe. Eliza set down the bucket. Does it matter? Only if you want it to. She thought about that, about grudges and forgiveness and moving forward, about the fact that holding on to anger was exhausting and she was tired of being exhausted. I want to let it go, she said. Not forget, but let go. Then do that. It was so simple when he said it, so obvious. Spring came slowly that year, like it wasn't quite sure it was welcome. The snow melted into mud, the mud dried into dust, and finally, green things started appearing. Grass first, then wildflowers, then leaves on the trees that dotted the prairie. Eliza expanded the chicken coop like she'd planned. Caleb helped her build it, and this time she knew what she was doing. No collapsed frames, no mistakes. Just steady work that resulted in something solid. They got a milk cow, a temperamental beast named Bessie, who kicked and complained but gave good milk. Eliza learned to handle her, learned the rhythm of milking, learned to make butter and cheese. The egg business grew. More customers, more routes, more money coming in. Porter started selling her eggs in the general store, and they sold out every week. People in town started treating them differently. Not all of them. There were still those who whispered and judged, but enough that walking down the main street didn't feel like running a gauntlet anymore. Ruth became a regular visitor, along with Helen and several others. They'd show up with news and gossip and help with projects. The cabin stopped feeling isolated and started feeling like part of a community. Bernard left town in July, moved east with some vague story about business opportunities. Margaret stayed but kept to herself, and Eliza was fine with that. Some wounds healed better with distance. One evening in late summer, Eliza and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sunset. It was their new routine, the end of the day, the quiet time before bed, just the two of them, and the endless sky. You ever regret it? Caleb asked. Coming here? All of it. No. Do you? Not even a little bit. He reached over, took her hand. You know what I was thinking about today? What? That day at the train station, when I saw you standing there about to get torn apart. I almost didn't step in, almost just walked away. Eliza's chest tightened. Why didn't you? Because something in your eyes reminded me of myself. That look of someone who's got nothing left but refuses to go down without a fight. He squeezed her hand. Best decision I ever made. Even better than the chickens? He laughed, and the sound was easy now, natural. Definitely better than the chickens. Though there a close second, the sun disappeared below the horizon, and the sky turned purple and orange and pink. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The chickens settled in for the night. Bessie lowed from the barn. Everything was ordinary. Everything was perfect. I love you, Eliza said. She'd said it before, but it still felt new every time. I love you too. Caleb pulled her closer. Thank you. For what? For getting on that train, for lying badly enough to get caught, for being stubborn enough to stay. He kissed the top of her head. For choosing me. You chose me first. Best choice I ever made. They sat there until the stars came out, until the air got cold enough that they had to go inside. And when they did, they went together, into their home, into their life, into the future they were building one day at a time. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt, still times when the past crept up and reminded them of everything they'd lost and survived. But they had each other. And in a territory where survival was the best most people could hope for, they'd found something better. They'd found belonging, purpose, love. They'd found home. And in the end, that was everything.